Ladies and gentlemen, Jai Hind, and a very warm welcome to a new edition of the Chanakya Dialogues English. We are going to discuss Ladakh today. It's really not a thing of the past. There are things that are happening in Ladakh, and there are things that are happening in the Indian subcontinent, which will have a direct bearing on Ladakh. But we cannot talk about Ladakh without touching upon certain things that happened last year. This is the anniversary of the unfortunate Galwan incident, where our brave warriors fought so courageously. I have with me Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, former GOC 15 Corps and currently Chancellor at Central University of Kashmir. And we're going to talk to him about what is happening in Ladakh, what is the geopolitical situation, what is the military situation. Sir, Jai Hind, and a very warm welcome to our show, sir.
Jai Hind to you, Gaurav, and to all our viewers.
Sir, we lost 20 of our brave hearts in Galwan, sir. Now this brings back some very sad memories. We saw the bodies going, sir, to the villages, and it's always a very poignant, a very sad moment when we see that. But apart from the sentiment of it, so how do you look at this thing professionally? So how do you look at the entire episode from a professional eye?
Gaurav, firstly, I must start by expressing my regrets for the loss of those 20 very, very valuable lives at Galwan on the 15th of June last year. But apart from the sentiments, as you very correctly say, we must look at it from a professional angle. And I dare say that this incident sometimes reminds me and tells me that we may be facing an army across the line of actual control, which is some kind of an entity which just does not believe in rules or any kind of functioning by way of what societies are normally made up of. To carry out the kind of merciless action which they did against our troops who had just gone for the purpose of verification. Probably nowhere in the world has ever an incident ever taken place where you find that a verification process where soldiers are going just to ascertain certain facts on the ground have been waylaid, virtually ambushed, and mercilessly beaten to death. And that just tells us that we are dealing with a very, very awkward kind of an adversary who you just cannot trust. So trust is something which even soldiers believe in. Although as a part of our profession, trust is not something which is normal when you're looking at an adversary. But there are certain rules of engagement. And you tend to look at your enemies and your adversaries and expect certain ethics in war. That, I'm afraid, the PLA has failed to display. And this is something which we need to keep in mind always while dealing with them across the line of actual control.
So, sir, you've written extensively about Ladakh, and there is so much in the recent past that you've written in Ladakh. But if we are to shed light on the present and also on the future, sir, we must also sort of understand why China did what it did in 2020, sir. I'm sure there are reasons why China reacted the way it did. Would you like to shed some light on why China did what it did, sir?
Let me try and summarize this because a lot has been written on this and no one has been really able to pin it down and come to a focused answer. But as per my reading and analysis, I do feel very strongly that China felt that the world was changing. With the pandemic in particular, if China itself was responsible for the pandemic, I cannot and none of us can say at the moment. Probably the truth will be revealed in the coming months. But 2020 seemed to be a year in which China seemed to be perceiving that the world was completely changing. The shift of the United States focus was taking place to the Indo-Pacific. India was a very important part of that shift. India coming on board with the United States and becoming a part of the US club for the containment of China. This is something which China was perceiving. It wanted to stop that. It wanted to prevent it. It wanted to send a message across to India that while it may have friends while functioning as a part of the US club the so-called Quad or anything else in the Indo-Pacific. It was all alone and isolated in the high Himalayas, where in the continental domain, it would have to face the might of the PLA in conjunction, collusive action with the Pakistan Armed Forces. Now, this is the kind of messaging which China was trying to convey to us. Its aims, its military aims were very limited. Its strategic aims appear to be this. And probably it is with this intent that it came. But things went horribly wrong. And Galwan itself, I think, upset the entire apple cart, from where the control which China was expecting to have on the military situation seemed to have gone out completely from under it. And that is why it came to the sorry pass that the situation came to in the later part of 2020, forcing China ultimately on the back foot, whereby it had to, quid pro quo operation had to be done, and China was finally on the back foot to a great extent. Although at the end of the day, China may be occupying territory. It may be occupying Indian territory, but it obviously did not come out the better as far as this entire operation was concerned.
So the thrust of your argument, sir, is that because Indo-US relations were moving at this very rapid pace, and China felt that in the Indo-Pacific area, India and the US were working together to contain China. Now, China did whatever it did, sir. Why did it stop where it stopped? I mean, if the strategic and tactical aims were these, why did China? So to me, whenever I try to analyze this incident, it almost seems like abandoning it and going away, because all of a sudden one day there was an announcement that China is going back, and it came like a bolt from the blue, and I did not understand, and I'd like you to explain to our viewers and also to me, sir, what happened? Why did China suddenly vanish from there?
See, Gaurav, it's not necessary always that when a nation launches its armed forces to the border, it is always with an intent of going to all-out war. There are political strategic aims that it sets out for itself, and drawn up against those political strategic aims are military aims. This is one of the most difficult things normally to do. How to convert the political strategic aim to what should be the military strategy, what should be the military aim. In this case, the Chinese appear to have a fairly clear political strategic aim, and that was to browbeat India, coerce India, message India that it was alone in the Himalayas, in the continental domain, while it was a part of different organizations, different agreements in the maritime domain, but it was alone here, and it would have to contend with China and collusion from Pakistan, as I already brought out. This messaging it wanted to send, and that it is not within the capability of India to face up to this. Now, how would this be converted into a military aim? Should this be conveyed to India by going to all-out war? Should it be conveyed by going to limited war? Only a border war? Only a portion of the Himalayan border where this war should be fought? Or simply just making faces from across the line of actual control? This is one of the most difficult things for the Chinese to actually ascertain. And they decided perhaps to carry out limited coercion, to carry out this, to convey this message to India, when it was not doing the same to any other nation in the Indo-Pacific. It was only carrying out wolf warrior diplomacy against other nations. It was carrying out military coercion against India, because they knew India was all alone here. It went slightly wrong, I think, in its discerning of the military aim. And to my mind, perhaps it could have read that after Galwan, and perhaps after the Kailash range operations by the Indian Army, which put the Indian Army in a position of advantage against the core center of the presence of the PLA in Ladakh, right there in Moldo, perhaps the Chinese realized that if they pressed too far beyond, it would lead to uncontrollable circumstances which could possibly lead to war. China was not prepared for war at this particular juncture, and therefore it probably felt that it has achieved a part of its aim, and therefore chose not to step beyond. Galwan had already created enough friction. The operations on the Kailash range had already created enough friction. The Chinese were not very confident of being able to handle friction beyond this. And that's perhaps one of the major reasons why they decided not to press home any further operations.
So after the disengagement at the Kailash ranges and also the Pengongsu Lakes, co-commander level talks have not taken place, sir. And also, sir, on Gojra, Hot Prince and Depsang, sir, we have not seen any further movement. Now, there are good 4-5 months of campaigning season that are left, sir. So there will be time when the rivers freeze, sir, and there will be time when it goes to -40, -50. But that time is still slightly away, and the campaigning season is still on. So my question to you is, do you think that things may hot up or things may heat up on the line of action control, given the overall scenarios globally that's happening, where people are blaming China for the coronavirus. People are saying that this is a bioweapon, etc. Again, China trying to divert attention and again put pressure because of the recent activities that have taken place on the Chinese side of the line of action controls.
This is a very appropriate question, Gaurav, and answering this will probably explain a lot. And you started very correctly by saying we are in the middle of the campaigning season. We've got a lot of time to go in the year 2021 still. While in the international environment, after the second wave, there's a tremendous amount of heating up of opinion, particularly after the coming of President Biden, heating up of opinion to point out as to where did this virus really come from. And obviously fingers are all pointing at China. The original name was the Wuhan virus, as what the rest of the world had named it. The Chinese are squirming. There's no doubt. The Chinese are squirming. You see, when a nation has got aspirations to be a superpower, it can't see itself having much smaller nations, much weaker nations pointing fingers at it and talking about its ethics, about its capability of leadership of the world, things of that nature. Because such nations take it for granted that the rest of the world is going to fall into line simply because this nation has got the economic and military power. But that's not happening in the case of China. And you very correctly read it and say that this is something which could irk China. This is something which could force China to try and divert attention, as you very correctly say. And there are areas where this can be done. There are areas in the Indo-Pacific where it can happen. In the South China Sea, this can happen. It can happen in the East China Sea. There are lots of areas there. But each of those locations, it will be even more difficult for the Chinese to actually establish their military aims there. Because each of those nations, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Australia down south, have got some form of a agreement with the United States, a security agreement with the United States, which will bring in the United States directly into it. In the case of India, we are a strategic partner, virtually a strategic partner today, but we don't have a defense agreement of that kind. We don't have a defense alliance of that kind, which will bring in the United States on our side physically to fight along the Himalayan borders. So this is one place where the Chinese can probably take a little more risk. They can throw caution to the winds, decide to go up to a point as they decided the last time too, and hope that this time things will be under their control. And therefore, I think the situation at the moment is one of wait and watch, and which is why you're seeing that after 11 rounds of talks between the corps commanders at the corps commander level, we have not seen the 12th round coming up. We are seeing some levels of reluctance on the part of the of the Chinese to actually come forward and resolve the other areas, Gojra, Hot Spring, Depsang, and places like that. When India agreed to vacate the Kailash range and the Chinese decided to vacate the Fingers complex on the North Pengongsu, The broad understanding was that there will be a comprehensive, return to status quo, although the Chinese never gave it in writing as such, but it was a broad general agreement. We all at that time also accepted the fact that the Chinese are one set of people who cannot be trusted, who don't ever play by the rules, and therefore they will go up to a point and then decide to play it by the ear subsequently. That's exactly what the Chinese are doing today. Because the world is in a reset, it's going to take a little time to do so, to change. The Middle East is stabilizing. A lot will happen after Afghanistan. After the withdrawal from Afghanistan by the United States, which is probably likely to take place by the middle of July or end of July, is being speeded up much faster than the date which has been set out by President Biden. After that, what really happens in Afghanistan, what is the impact of that in the Middle East and Central Asia and other areas, that will finally decide how the United States is going to address the Indo-Pacific, and that will probably decide what the Chinese response is going to be in the future. So that is why I think a wait and watch situation will continue to exist for some time.
So what do you think are China's geopolitical concerns as far as the Indo-US relationship is concerned? Because Trump was one kind of person, but even under Biden, who's very understated when it comes to making statements compared to Trump, these things seem to be on the rise, this entire relationship of Indo-US. Do you think this sort of presents any direct threat to China's strategic aims? And also, could any of this manifest negatively for India, sir?
See, Gaurav, to answer that, I think I need to go back to that age-old issue, which the public always needs to be reminded, our viewers always need to be reminded about, and that is that famous trade-off between what is called the continental theory versus the maritime theory. Which is more important? Is the continental domain more important, or is the maritime domain more important when it comes to the relations between India and China? What the Chinese are very clear in their perception for very long is that India joining any kind of a US dispensation, US-led dispensation, is always going to be for the purpose of adding strength, power to the maritime domain. The United States has a capability within the Pacific, that's the entire West Pacific, domination of the West Pacific, which will continue for a fairly long time because of the kind of domination that the United States Navy holds. But as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, this is the area where the United States and China both do not have bases. It is primarily India. This is the Indian Ocean, and the shape of the Indian Peninsula dictates a lot. So nations would always want India on their side if they wish to defend, or should you say secure, the very long lines of communication, the sea lanes of communication which flow from the Suez Canal, the Persian Gulf, right through the Straits of Malacca to the South China Sea and beyond. So taking India on board for the United States is a big plus here. This is something the Chinese just do not want it to happen. All these years in the past, the Chinese have been ensuring pressure on India in the continental domain, on the high Himalayas, with the prime purpose of ensuring that India does not have the resources, capability to develop a very strong navy, a blue water navy in the Indian Ocean. Because should it be able to do that, then India on its own will be a very, very important power to which many other nations will flock. So these are some of the dynamics of the geopolitics between India, the United States, and China. If you notice, 5, 7, 8 years ago, when the announcements for the shift of the US focus, the pivot to Asia, was taking place under President Obama at that time, what the Chinese were most concerned about was a possibility of an Indo-US-Japan kind of a triangle or an equation emerging. When Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014, A lot was being spoken at that time that Mr. Modi is close to the Japanese. He knows the Japanese and he's close to the Japanese because he had done a lot of development work in Gujarat based upon inputs from Japan. And this is something with although he had a good relationship with the Chinese too, but this is something which the Chinese feared, that this old relationship may possibly allow India to develop a very strong Indo-US-Japan equation. And that would not be something which would be very advantageous for the United States. So these are some of the dynamics which continue to exist. These are still very much in the air at the moment until the final shift of the center of gravity. These things will continue to play their role and will continue to be discussed in strategic affairs in the whole of Asia.
So my last question is about the Quad, sir. And, so UK said that it wanted to join the Quad. France expressed interest so that it becomes Quad Plus, 4 members of the Quad, and then Quad Plus. Recently, Bangladesh also made some noises and they said that, they expressed interest, which China did not take very kindly to. Because obviously China has significant investments in Bangladesh. So then China did not take very kindly to Bangladesh expressing interest in possibly in the future, trying to become a part of Quad. I'd like your comments on this, please, sir.
See, remember, Gaurav, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives all form a very important part of what was earlier called the string of pearls, if you remember. And it forms a part of the overall strategy of China to coerce India to create some kind of a influence within the near abroad region of India. Now, out of the blue, suddenly a nation such as Bangladesh expresses its willingness to join the Quad, probably in the hope that by joining the Quad, not only will it become, give it a bit of a boost as far as the strategic importance is concerned, but also it's a nation which is always on the lookout for economics, something which Bangladesh is very good at, its own self-development, etc. So therefore, once the strategic relationship improves with big powers like the United States, obviously the economic relationship improves. By becoming a part of the Quad, Bangladesh could actually upset the entire apple cart. Because here you have the Indo part of the lexicon of Indo-Pacific. The Indo part is at the moment being looked at purely with India. And suddenly you find another South Asian nation such as Bangladesh coming on board and willing to join it. Tomorrow, should Sri Lanka also join into it? Should Myanmar also join into it? It will upset the apple cart completely for the Chinese, which will mean that 3 or 4 major powers in the Pacific, Japan, the United States, Australia, possibly Vietnam, possibly Indonesia, and that will become a very strong entity in the Pacific. And here another strong emerging entity such as Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, etc. This will totally take the situation, the geostrategic situation, particularly in this area, in the favor of the United States. So I think the Chinese wanted to nip this in the bud. And they seem to have given a reasonably stern warning to Bangladesh. And they've got a fair amount of things going with Bangladesh, and perhaps they would like to turn on the screws to see how far would they like to go in turning the screws of coercion to prevent Bangladesh thinking of actually joining the Quad in the future.
Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, with Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, we discussed a host of issues. We discussed what is actually happening in Ladakh. How does the general see the scenario in Ladakh playing out? We discussed the Quad and finally ended up with Bangladesh possibly trying to be a part of Quad Plus. Stay tuned. Next week, I'm going to join you for another episode of the Chanakya Dialogues English. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon. Thank you very much.